race of the season we're preparing for, the first of two races this weekend around the 3.9-kilometre Hermann Tilke designed circuit. The third year in a row that the World Series by Renault has visited the Moscow Raceway, and it is a very windy and very chilly day here just outside Moscow. It hasn't deterred, though, the Russian fans getting the opportunity to enjoy some international motorsport. So hello from myself, Ben Evans. Alongside me is the motorsport journalist and blogger Keith Collentine. And Keith, this is really what the whole day builds up to. Full Renault 3.5 litre cars at the finishing school for Formula One.
And I think one of the quickest championship series, probably the quickest that we ever see at Moscow.
So let's have a look then at what's happened this year to date, where championship leader Carlos Sainz stalled on the grid ahead of race one. It meant that Will Stevens made a lightning getaway, and he led into the first corner of the season, a lead he wouldn't relinquish through to the checkered flag. The race, though, was marked by this gigantic incident involving Marco Sorensen and Jasmin Jafar. Both of them very lucky to walk away with nothing more than severely damaged wallets. So Will Stevens, winner in race one. Second time around, there were no such dramas for Carlos Sainz, and he eased clear as the rest of the pack jostled for position into the Rettifilio for the first time. For the rest of the field, this performance from Sainz was a little bit of a portent of what was to come as he scored his first win of the year. On to the Motorland Aragon, and in the first race, it was the same story. Carlos Sainz winning, and winning comfortably. Race 2 upset the apple cart somewhat. A poor qualifying session for Sainz left him towards the middle of the top 10. It was Oliver Rowland in his first 3.5 litre campaign who came through to score victory in just his fourth race in the category. On to the streets of Monaco and the highlight of the season, the Blue Ribbon event on Grand Prix morning. It was Sainz Dam's teammate Norman Nato who put the car on pole position, led away and led all the way through to take the checkered flag clear of Marco Sorensen and Jasmin Jafar. Nato overcome with that triumph. On to Spa at the start of June. It was the weekend dominated by Carlos Sainz. Pole position for a much delayed start to race one was converted into a very comfortable victory. Race 2 was a little bit closer as Oliver Rowland pushed Sainz all the way as Pietro Pantini ended his racing gloriously in the barrier. Sainz becoming our first double victory of the season. He contemplates investing in a new mantelpiece to collect all of his trophies. So it means that Sainz is a very comfortable championship leader from fellow Red Bull junior Pierre Gasly in second. Oliver Rowland just clear in third, ahead of Will Stevens, with Norman Nato and Jasmin Jafar in fifth and sixth. But today, it's a very, very different looking grid, because on pole position is the Russian driver Sergei Sorokin, impressing in front of his home fans as he needed to. He's had 4 retirements on the bounce, looking to build on that podium he scored a long time ago, middle of April, back in Monza. So Sorokin, the Fortec car, fastest in qualifying this morning, and fastest by a couple of tenths of a second.
It's amazing. I mean, we knew that we need to recover. We knew that we have everything for that. But of course, the best possible way to do it on a home track. And I'm really, really happy to do this. Really, this track it's not so easy to overtake. I would say it's still possible, but it's not so easy as Monza, for example. So let's see. We just need to make a good start, just to see if the car is working well on a long distance, if the tires stays there for enough laps to finish the race. But anyway, I would say that everything feels good, and now it's not so hot, so it's not going to be the most difficult race for us, I would say. But anyway, now we just need to avoid the technical issues we had the last, I don't remember even how many races. So I mean, we're quick, and the rest should not be a big problem.
So delighted Sergei Sorokin, looking to get his season back on track as he sits in pole position. The grid very, very busy surrounding him, as all the guests and VIPs enjoy the experience of being at the forefront of an international motorsport event. Further back, it's a little bit lonely for Will Buller, who's got his engine cover off there. Hopefully that's not an issue for Will, as the wind really whipping up here at the Moscow Raceway. It's a problem when the World Superbike first went there as well here from Patrice Ratti.
Motorsport Technologies has announced a brand new car and championship for next year. What can you reveal about this brand new Renault Sport Trophy?
A Renault Sport Trophy is a spectacular car. It's a beautiful design, a GT-like car. It has more than 500 horsepower, carbon fiber monocoque, very high safety, high performance. We're going to race by 2 drivers per car with 3 races during the weekend, 2 sprint and an endurance race. And it will be in the World Series next year.
We're on the grid for the first Formula 3.5 Series race of the weekend. The grid is quite mixed. It's quite tough this season. 4 winners within 7 races. How do you rate those drivers this year?
Well, it's always a very tough competition. Today we have 17 drivers in 1 second in the qualifying. The beginning of the season, Carlos Sainz was very impressive, but we have 2 rookies straight from Formula Renault 2.0, Pierre Gasly and Oliver Rowland, who are very, very good this year. And now today we have different drivers in the front row, so it's very open.
At the end of this meeting, the championship leader will get quite a strange, beautiful gift in Nürburgring. What is it?
Yes, of course. He will be able to race, to run on the Formula 1 during the 2 days of the weekend in Nürburgring, thanks to the Red Bull Ring car. Yes.
Thank you. Enjoy the race.
Thank you very much. Enjoy it too.
So lots of exciting news there from Patrice Ratti, and we'll look forward to that Renault Sport Trophy when it gets going in the 2015 season. A little bit of manoeuvring there for Sergei Sirotkin's car. Hopefully that's not an issue. It's just to ease out any stiffness that may have come into the car. We're also hoping momentarily to hear from Olivier Panis, who's a very proud dad today after son Aurélien was victorious in the 2-litre Euro Cup race, which finished about 40 minutes ago. So the grid still in full swing. Here's Olivier Panis.
Happy man, happy father, I guess, because 40 minutes ago, Aurélien, your son, won his first victory in the Euro Cup Formula Renault 2.0.
Yeah, well, first of all, for sure, I'm very happy for him, very happy for the team. He did a fantastic pole this morning. Won the first race in World Series. I think it's fantastic for him. We know the series is unbelievable, strong and difficult, but it's so nice, I mean, to win in the championship.
Is he going to race next year in the Formula Renault 3.5 series?
Well, you need to wait a bit and to continue to make like we did today, like some good podium, good race. I feel already bad in my heart, very pain for me, and if he did this, I think it's more hard, but you know, it's the way to go.
We have a very mixed grid today. Carlos Sainz Jr. is quite far behind, a Russian in front of his home crowd on pole position. So what do you expect for the race?
Well, I think Sirotkin did a fantastic pole. I mean, I think he's pretty quick. I'm very ashamed for Dams because, you know, he's the team of my heart, because I won a long time ago with them and he was leading all the time. It's a bad time for them, but we know he's a strong team to come back maybe and prepare tomorrow.
Do you think Carlos Sainz Jr. will achieve his season a bit like Kevin Magnussen last year?
I hope so. I mean, Dams, he was very good everywhere. I mean, but many of the team is strong also, like Formula Renault, the 3.5. We have many teams really strong. For sure, the fight is very high level.
Thank you, Olivier.
Thank you. Thanks.
1996 Monaco Grand Prix winner there, Olivier Panis, who had almost a decade-long career in F1. And interesting to see whether or not Aurélien Panis will graduate up into the Formula Renault 3.5 litre championship next year. So Sergei Sirotkin returning for his second year in the category, the test driver for the Sauber Formula 1 team. We're looking a little bit lower down the grid. That is Oscar Tunio, who lines up in 8th place. This is just his second event in Formula Renault 3.5 litre racing. Driver who steps up from the 2-litre championship, and he signed a 1.5-year deal with the Pons squad. So the plan is that the remainder of this year it is a learning campaign, and then next year he's going to look to challenge for the title. And I think he exceeded all expectations to be to 8th on the grid, which begins to be emptied of the VIPs and mechanics. The drivers now set their minds to the 40-minute plus 1 lap race ahead. 7th on the grid then is Jazeman Jaffar, who after a very difficult first 2 meetings of the year in Monza and Motorland Aragon, was on the podium in Monte Carlo, continued to a good run in Spa, so he comes into this weekend 6th in the standings, Keith.
Yeah, certainly picking up for Jafar so far as we move on to Oliver Rowland, who really had some good pace, I thought, in that in the last of the races that we saw in Spa. But his race was really undone by that pit stop, which went so disastrously wrong, and he went from challenging Carlos Sainz for potential victory to really picking up what he could from that weekend, which was a bit disappointing. But we have seen the Fortec cars. They didn't have a very great first race in Monza, but they've really picked up, and of course with Sirotkin on pole position, showing good form here this weekend.
So Pietro Fantine, who lines up in 4th on the grid, who had a wretched weekend at Spa, 2 crashes in the same place, rather undid him. Zol Lamberg has had a fine qualifying period this morning. He lines up in 3rd place, the Swiss driver in the AVF car, and thumbs up to the cameras from Zol.
We've tended to see him qualify well and get off the line well, but he's not had the best race pace, and quite a few times this year we've been seeing him with quite a few cars stacked up behind him, and particularly with the layout of track that we've got here with so many corners earlier in the lap, I think we may see him with a bit of a train in the early stages of the race.
So 2nd on the grid is Pierre Gasly, and just to say, as ever, if you'd like to get in touch with us, do use the hashtag BTS Motorsport. Any questions, comments about Formula Renault 3.5 litre racing or the world of motorsport in general, we'll be happy to pick them up during the course of the race. And this is a golden opportunity for Pierre Gasly to close in a little bit of ground on championship leader Carlos Sainz, who is marooned towards the very back of the grid after a very tough qualifying period earlier on. And it was a bad qualifying session for the Dams team in general, because Norman Nato is even further back. There is Carlos Sainz, and he has got far too many cars for his liking ahead of him. And going back last year, this is a track the Dams team have always struggled to get to grips with. It was, as a team, their worst meeting in 2013, with only just 1 podium finish across the 4 starts that the squad had. And in 2014, it has thus far continued that way. But for Sergei Sirotkin, he lines up in pole in the Fortec car, and conversely this is a great track for Fortec because they had the double victory last year at Stoffel Vandoorne.
Yeah, and a massive opportunity for Sirotkin in what's been a difficult season so far. As we know, he's looking to break into Formula 1 with the Sauber team, who are trying to get some Russian money behind them, and this could not possibly be a better position for him to start the race, certainly in terms of impressing any potential Russian backers. Very, very important for him to put on a good show this weekend and really give cause to back him as another Russian driver potentially making his way into Formula 1, as we see the mechanics dashing off the grid, not wanting to hold on too late. If they're still attending to their cars when all the lights go out, then there'll be a risk of getting their drivers a penalty, but it looks like we've got all the grid clear now.
So Sergei Sirotkin, just 18 years old, and there's certainly been a lot of debate about whether or not he has had too much too soon in his racing career, but certainly in Spa last time out, it was mechanical failure in one of the races. It was an incident that wasn't really his fault in the other, and so he has had bad luck swinging against him. Today is the opportunity to make amends on a circuit that suits Fortec beautifully. They've won 3 of the 4 preceding Formula Renault 3.5 litre races here on the Moscow Raceway. So we've never seen a Formula Renault 3.5 litre race before. To explain what we're going to look forward to, the race is going to be over 40 minutes plus 1 lap. They all run on a Michelin tyre. There is no mandatory pit stop in today's race. The car themselves are powered by a 3.5 litre Zytec engine. It produces 530 brake horsepower. They have DRS available to them, which they'll predominantly use along this back straight. This is one of the most technically challenging circuits of the season, because the first 2 sectors, it's really a continuous sequence of left and right turns, then have the over 1 kilometre long back straight that brings them through into the main overtaking point on the circuit, which is the very sharp turn 15.
One thing we do see, because it's such a tight and twisty track, and because we know it's difficult to make overtaking moves, we often see drivers trying very, very hard on the first lap. It's not at all uncommon to see a bit of bumping as they go through the first corners, because it really is the best opportunity the drivers have to make a few gains, and particularly for Carlos Sainz, all the way down in 16th place. I think we may see some very exciting shots. So I certainly hope we will, from the onboard camera that he's carrying on his car today as he tries to make his way up to the points.
It's coming towards the end of the formation lap as Sorokin wheels around to get some heated tyres. Let's have a look at the grid. So row 1 is Sorokin and Gasly. Row 2, Zolamberg from Pietro Fantini. He needs to be bounced back from Spa. 5th on the grid, Oliver Rowland, the first of the Brits. More points, hopefully pleased for Oliver today. Roberto Mehi, penalised after qualifying, he lines up in 7th. Will Stevens still struggling for qualifying pace, and the Straka car starts 9th, ahead of Richie Stanaway, his second meeting in place of Mathieu Vaxivière. William Buller, difficult season continues, down in 13th, and Carlos Sainz all the way down in 16th. He has got an awful lot to do, as does Marco Sorensen, who will be furious with 18th. Norman Nato likewise 19th, and it's second of the Russian drivers, Roman Mavlanov, who completes the field in 20th place. Mavlanov, who has travelled all the way across the Europe flow in wheel tracks, so that man compatriot Daniel Kvyat into Formula 1.
Kvyat, of course, never raced in this category, although he was very successful in the 2-litre support series. He made his way up into F1 via F3, as we see Sainz taking up his 16th place on the grid, and he needs a very, very good start from all the way back on the 8th row and on the dirty side of the grid, which I think will make a bit. And we got a problem for Gasly. And
Pierre Gasly's got a problem as the red lights almost had counted out. Pierre Gasly has lost the engine. We're going to get another formation lap, whilst the and we've got the problem for Rowland as well. So Oliver Rowland is stuck on the grid. So is Pierre Gasly. The Arden and Fortec mechanics are going to have...
And Sainz.
And Carlos Sainz. Good spot, Keith.
We were just about to say that was going to play into Sainz's hand beautifully, because both his championship rivals hit trouble, and yet Sainz is also stranded on the grid just as he was at Monza at the start of the season.
Oh dear. So it has been, thus far this year, a brilliant campaign for the two Red Bull Junior drivers, but it goes wrong for them simultaneously here in the Moscow Raceway, and we see it again. And Carlos Sainz, he's not spotted somebody in the crowd he knows. He is signalling to the marshals that he's lost the engine, and therefore hoping that it will be covered by waved yellow flags. But the big question now, Keith, is it's a very short lap here. The lap record is just a 1 minute 20 seconds, 0.025. It's a very short lap. Whether they can get these cars clear in time on this formation lap. As ever, hashtag BTS Motorsport if you'd like to get in touch with Keith Conte and myself. And Pierre Gasly now gets a little bit of a push. Oliver Rowland would appear possibly to be jammed in gear there.
Carlos Sainz can count himself fortunate that he was the first of the 3 cars to receive attention, because as you say, Ben, it isn't going to take very long for the remaining cars to make their way around the rest of the Moscow Raceway to take up the starting position.
This is going to make for a fascinating race, because I would say the 3 fastest cars, pound for pound, in the championship are the ones that got stranded on the grid then, and therefore they are going to be looking to charge up through the pack. They're going to have to overtake the best part of 10 cars to get into the points. And as you said, Keith, Sainz the first to receive attention. He is at the head of the queue at the end of the pit lane and getting ready to rejoin the fray when this race gets underway.
Of course, the challenge now for the remaining drivers who have to take up their positions on the grid is they have to remember where their grid slots were, bearing in mind the fact that 3 cars are now missing, which can be surprisingly difficult in very low-slung single-seater cars where visibility is not great. Even Formula 1 drivers find this difficult, and back at Monaco, where Pastor Maldonado didn't take the start, 3 of the drivers who were supposed to line up behind him ended up getting penalties because they started from the wrong grid slot. I think Carlos Sainz has already taken up his position at the exit of the pit lane, but the other 2 drivers who started much further forward on the grid are still waiting to get into position, ready to go. And we see somebody else pulling into the pits.
One of the cars.
Yeah.
So that's either Matthias Lane or Will Stevens. We'll have a look when we get an external shot as to who it is. It was Will Stevens, unfortunately, who was also ducked into the pit lane. So we're going to get a somewhat depleted grid. Let's hope that we get going this time around. As everybody's in position, it's eyes to the gantry. I'm looking for drivers waving. As yet, nobody is. Being held for quite a while here before we get a signal as to whether or not they're going to go on this occasion. Now the red lights come on, so we are about to go racing here in Moscow. 5 lights on, revs rise. Out go the lights and away we go. And it's a good start from Sergei Sorokin. It's also a brilliant getaway from Zol Amberg. But it's Sorokin from Amberg, then Pietro Fantini, Jasmine Jafar, as they safely make it through turn 1, with the exception of Roman Mavlanov, who runs wide in the background, helps himself to a couple of extra places, and then almost runs out of road as Roberto Mehi looks to challenge Jafar for 4th place around the outside, and he succeeds in so doing, immediately onto terms with Pietro Fanti, looking to move up into 3rd place as the pack head downhill out of turn 5 through turn 6, and Pierre Gasly is still stranded there at the end of the pit lane and lost the engine waiting to get into the action. Out front though, Sergei Sorokin has converted pole. The real battle is this one for 3rd.
Really nice move from Roberto Mehi at the start as he explores having a dive down the inside of turn 12, where we do occasionally see some very bold moves from drivers as they wind their way through those very slow corners. You can just throw the car down the inside and sometimes make a pass stick, but Mehi hung it out around the outside early on in the lap and made a move stick to get his way back up into 4th place ahead of Jazeman Jafar, who's now inspecting the back of the Zeta Course car, and Mehi having to get defensive as they have the long run back to the final corner. Sorokin taking the lead, and it looks like Mehi's going to have Jafar covered off. Jafar tries to cut across the back of him to get a run out of the final corner down the short start-finish straight, but as we often see at this Moscow Raceway, it's very difficult to make a move stick there. Jafar gave it a good go though.
I made a mistake there. It was in fact Matthias Lane who went into the pits. Will Stevens is there, I'm pleased to report, and on the tail of Jazeman Jafar. So that is good to see. Sainz and Rowland have both come through, and they're already on to terms with Norman Nato at the back of the pack. So that is pleasing as out front, which possibly suggests it was in fact Lucas Giotto who we lost into the pits in the Draco car in the Silver Machine. As out front, Sergei Sorokin leads and has built a nice big buffer already over Zol Lamberg.
And you have to say, from Sainz's point of view, I mean, yes, he's 1 place lower than he qualified on the grid in the race at the moment, but from the point of view of the championship, really, this is his Christmas and his birthday and Easter and everything else come at once, because both of his closest championship rivals, who were so well placed on the grid to take big points off him, have been badly compromised. As we watch Pierre Gasly, he gets his race underway 1 lap later than anyone else, a good lap and a half, in fact, behind the rest of the field, and his prospect of coming away from today with any points are virtually gone, as we see Sorokin is turning into the final corner, just as right at the back of the pack, Sainz Jr. and Rowland are joining the rear of this very, very long back straight at the Moscow Raceway.
The trouble they've got now is all of the cars lined up ahead of them, which they have got to overtake, and that is going to be the difficulty for them. There is William Buller, who is just in pursuit of Oscar Tunio.
Sainz's first target is going to be his own teammate, Norman Nato, and then in front of him I think we've got, yeah, it's Marco Sorensen, and well, we've been talking about how tricky it is to overtake around the Moscow Raceway, and they don't have the benefit of the mandatory pit stop in this race, so we'll see what Carlos Sainz Jr. can do as we watch Beitske Visser in the middle of the pack, who we saw talking to us earlier on in the show, and looking back at Marco Sorensen as they thread their way through this very, very busy middle part of the lap, which has a bit of gradient. It has a couple of corners with blind apeces as the drivers approach them, and it's very important for drivers to maintain that rhythm and really just do what they can to stay close to the driver in front. And there's Oliver Rowland making that look at turn 12, which we talked about again before, Ben, where you can, if you're very, very ambitious, throw one up the inside and make a move on the rival in front. Rowland's effort to quickly put one over Carlos Sainz Jr. has come to naught there as they rejoin the long straight, which is where we tend to see most of the overtaking going on. It's the best opportunity for drivers to use their drag reduction systems, which, as we know in this series, are similar to what they have in Formula 1. They can reduce the drag on the rear wing to increase their straight line speed, but unlike in Formula 1 where you can only use it within 1 second of the car in front, here they have a limited amount of time they can use it per race. But for Sergei Sorokin out front, he's the only driver with a clear view of the track ahead and just concentrating on edging further away from second place Zol Lamberg.
And for Zol Lamberg, this would be a career best result if he stays where he is. Likewise for Sergei Sorokin, who is chasing his first Formula Renault 3.5 litre championship victory. And then Pietro Fantini III has shaken off Roberto Mehi. He's got Jazeman Jafar, then Will Stevens. We're looking for a bit more in terms of progress from Will. Here's another look as they went away. It was a very quick start from Sorokin. He just did exactly what he needed to do with such a short sprint towards the first turn. You just want a clean getaway and actually avoid being boxed in. The same for Amberg. He just made sure he covered Fantine as they arrived into that first left-hander, and thereafter it's a case of making sure you've got the heat in those Michelin tyres and putting together a good first lap. You can see, though, what a brilliant first few corners it was from Sergei Sirotkin, almost Vettel-esque in terms of the margins he built up over the rest of the pack. The fighting then probably is from 7th onwards. Marlon Stockinger, Richie Stanaway, Matthias Ley and Oscar Tunio. As Carlos Sainz unable to pass Norman Nato, Oliver Rowland, you feel, has got a far faster car than Sainz. He's looking every which way to get past the Spaniard. But if Carlos Sainz can't make progress, he certainly isn't going to allow Rowland through.
No, I wouldn't think so, and Rowland perhaps a little bit unfortunate. If you want to, get past a car, you need as big of a performance advantage over it as you can, and Sainz, you would tend to think, is going to be pretty close to Rowland in terms of what he can do with the car, as we look at Jasmine Jafar, who was shuffled back to 5th by Roberto Mehi on the first lap, and this is the difficulty that we see at Moscow Raceway. It is a track where it's difficult to stay close enough to the car in front to be able to make use of that one major overtaking opportunity that you get per lap. But Jafar certainly having one of the better races that he's enjoyed so far this year, as he gets a little bit leery at the exit of the corner. This is a track where we have a lot of what in engineering parlance you would call traction events. It's a bit more punishing for the rear tyres, and certainly as this fairly long race goes on, we're going to see a lot of the drivers spinning up their wheels and slipping a little bit, and that is where some of the opportunities for the pursuing pack to make a move can come from. And Rowland has dropped quite a long way back off the tail of Carlos Sainz Jr. there. Ben, I wonder if he's had some sort of mistake on this lap.
He has, and I think what's going to be worrying here for Carlos Sainz and Oliver Rowland is that the top 7 cars have really spread themselves out quite significantly in these opening stages, and there are some quite big gaps opening up. So we're going kart with Sainz now. He sets off in pursuit of teammate Norman Nato, but he's not as yet been in position to even really challenge Nato for position. So he uses a curve trying to chase down his French teammate in the Dam squad. See this opening section, the corners come so quickly after each other, particularly these 3.5 litre cars, probably a little bit faster than they maybe need, that suits the circuit. Roman Vlanov under investigation. Suspect that's for the several places that he helped himself to after running wide at turn 1, and so that will be punished, no doubt. So we're 10 minutes in here at the Moscow Raceway, and it is the Russian driver Sergei Sirotkin who leads the way out front from Zol Lamberg. Back to the fight for 16th place between Norman Nato and Carlos Sainz. And this is a real reversal of fortunes for the Dams team. And the other difficulty for them, Keith, is that sometimes when a team performs badly, a driver misses a start like that, they can get some clear air and essentially have an extended test session. But because this group of cars are so closely bunched that they can't even do an awful lot in terms of running in clear air and actually learning to improve the setup for tomorrow morning's qualifying session. Yeah, I don't think Dams are going to be learning an awful lot about whatever their bogey at this particular circuit is. I mean, they've been scorching away in the team standings, although they failed to score in the first race at Monza, largely because Carlos Sainz Jr. had that problem on the first lap. They've built up a massive 71-point margin over their pursuers, but I think a lot of that is going to be undone today, because at the moment you'd have to say it looks fairly unusual that, or fairly unlikely rather, that Nato or Sainz are going to make any points. And interesting there, we couldn't quite see why, because we can't see behind Sainz at the moment, but he held a very tight line coming out of the right-hander just back there, and sure enough Rowland has closed back up onto the back of him, and Sainz has just slipped back from Norman Nato. And I don't know if it's just his struggle with this track, or if he's even minded to just look after his tyres and look after the rears at this stage in the hope that he's going to get a few more opportunities later on. You never know, there might be a safety car period, at which point he'd be grateful that he'd looked after his tyres at this early stage, and maybe just hope that the drivers in front are going to weaken and become more easy pickings later on in the event. I was going to say, I think patience will start to wear thin here, because the drivers, much as they will admire those Renault Sport liveried rear wings, they'll start to become sick of the sight of them and maybe start to look to challenge. Meanwhile, out front, Sergei Sirotkin has got Zol Lamberg coming back towards him, and Sirotkin is beginning to push the limits of adhesion, trying to build that buffer out front, and this is one of those tracks where you can so easily make a mistake as Roland goes into the gravel trap. So he evidently tried something on Carlos Sainz. He has possibly incurred some damage to his front wing in so doing. So Roland out of the race. He's in the gravel trap. He is going to head directly back to his pits. There is the remnants of his front wing. Now, is that going to prompt a safety car? Potentially not. Right, here we see the end of it. Oh, and that was a much bigger incident than maybe the positioning of the cars suggested. And Oliver Rowland, Carlos Sainz almost making a baby for the Renault 3.5 litre car, as clearly Rowland went for a move that Sainz closed the door on very late. And the outcome, we see was retirement for Rowland. I'd be surprised, Keith, if Sainz continues much longer.
You know, particularly given the position he was in the first place. But no, they've obviously made fairly hefty contact down there, and yeah, I think you can put 2 and 2 together. You do occasionally see drivers dive into the inside, and we'd seen Roland sort of size up the inside line on Sainz on at least one occasion before early on. Maybe we'll get a fuller replay. Perhaps something from Carlos Sainz's onboard will yield a few more clues as to what happened there. And yeah, we do seem to be seeing this leading pair of Sergei Sorokin and Zoe Lamberg are closing up a little bit. We've got to keep an eye on the gap for you, and actually Zoe Lamberg has dropped back just a little bit on this lap so far, but Sorokin certainly not streaking away with this race at this stage.
And the big unknown here is that both of these drivers are a little bit inconsistent. This is what Formula Renault 3.5 litre racing is all about, as a visibly livid Oliver Rowland stalks down the pit lane back to the Fortec pit. Gets a huge cheer from the crowd, who clearly appreciated his efforts and his pace thus far. As I was going to say, yeah, part of the 3.5 litre championship this is the finishing school for Formula 1. Recent graduates include the likes of Daniel Ricciardo, Sebastian Vettel, Pastor Maldonado, Robert Kubica, all came through this category, and this is where the drivers really learn in these longer races about being consistent lap upon lap, about managing the tyres, managing the performance of the car. And as a result, some of the less experienced drivers, like Sergei Sorokin, who is only in his 4th season of car racing, who's still learning his craft. The same goes for Zoe Lamberg, and when you've got a deficit of something like a second or so, all it takes is the tiniest of errors, and then it all begins to unravel a little bit, and that's what Amberg is trying to do at the moment, getting onto terms with the race leader Sergei Sorokin, trying to force that mistake. Well, if you've got views on that Sainz and Roland crash, do let us know. Hashtag BTS Motorsport. So your order then is Sergei Sorokin leads, Zoe Lamberg in second, Pietro Fantine in 3rd place, and Oliver Rowland becomes the second retirement of the race after Meindert van Buren. With a good scrap a little bit lower down the order between the 2 Lotus cars. It's Marlon Stockinger, who is just ahead of the Kiwi driver. There he is, Richie Stanaway, deputising in place once more of Mathieu Vaxivière. They've got Matthias Lane in the second of the Stracker cars, trying to close up onto their tail. And then we've got the promising Oscar Tunio, Roberto Merhi and Jasmine Jafar continue to dispute 4th and 5th. And the pack just beginning to ease away from each other. The battle, though, is at the very top left of your screen there. There it is. It's between Oscar Tunio, who has got William Buller right in behind him. This for the final points position. And Buller shows himself to the inside of Tunio. Quite squeezed through, and actually just slithers wide on the exit of the corner.
Yeah, I think Buller got in a little bit too deep there, ran wide, and has spoiled his exit a little bit there. But we are seeing a few drivers come together. In fact, Will Stevens in 6th place is beginning to edge closer towards Jasmine Jafar. He's taken a couple of tenths out of him. There's still about 2.5 seconds between the pair of them, but we are seeing some of the gaps close up as we pass the halfway point, or approach the halfway point rather, of this race, which is going to be the point at which we'll start to see if which drivers have set their cars up better to run with a heavier fuel load at the beginning of the race, and which have set their cars up more to handle well with a light fuel load for those dying stages of the races, where there might be a few more positions available. For us, we see that was Stanaway getting a little bit leery on the exit of that corner, and that brings us back to what we were talking about, the pressure that the rear tyres are under and the amount of traction or traction events that go on at this circuit. and how easily they become stressed. So here's our leading 6 cars with Sorokin and Amberg. The gap between them is definitely under a second, and Amberg seems to be taking most of the time out of Sorokin through the last sector, and the last sector here is basically that enormous back straight and the final corner, which suggests he might just have a little bit less rear wing on.
Or it suggests that he is using all of his DRS nice and early, trying to force that mistake from Sergei Sorokin, because Sorokin, this is a huge pressure event for him, both in terms of the fact of impressing in his home race, but also given that he has failed to make it through to the checkered flag in the last 4 outings, he really needs a good result, not only today, but all weekend, to get any sort of a title challenge back on track. And Sorokin comes just through into the tabletop, one of the nicest sections of the track list. There are some gradual elevation changes as the middle sector, it does begin to climb up and down. Certainly the 10 and 11 section, a little bit reminiscent of a similar sequence at the Motorland Aragon. And then it all becomes through turns 12, 13 and 14, about setting up for this long run along the back straight. So let's see if Zol Amberg comes back onto turns with Sergei Sorokin. Sorokin has got DRS in full flow as he looks to maintain his advantage. We're coming to the end now of the 12th lap of the race. And Sorokin and Amberg, the gap between the pair of them last time was 0.7 of a second. That's pretty much as it was, as Jafar's got a good run here on Roberto Merhi towards turn 1. Is he going to make the move? He jinks out, darts the inside. Merhi, though, the former F3 Euro Series champion, closes the door, keeps Jessamine Jafar at bay. This a good tussle for 4th and 5th. And Keith, it's great to see Roberto Merhi back at the front of the field.
Yeah, it's great to see Merhi and driving so well in a single seat as well. Obviously spent a couple of years over in the DTM, which didn't go particularly well for him. And it's a big move to come back to a series like this where you would hope to get an elevation perhaps into a Formula 1 team if you had a good season. And he's had a couple of good runs so far for Zeta course this year. Not a team that showed particularly well for much of the season during 2013. But Merhi, second place in the first race, obviously, at Monza. He's had a couple of 6 and a couple of 9s since then. Not a great weekend at Spa, and feeling the heat a little bit from Jessamine Jafar at the moment. But yeah, this is certainly looking a little bit more like the form perhaps we expected, because obviously he was very accomplished in the earlier part of his single-seater career.
So we are coming up to halfway here at the Moscow Raceway. Sergei Sorokin leading it from Zol Amberg and Pietro Fantini. If you've just joined us, we had a little bit of a disjointed start with arguably the 3 quickest drivers in the championship, Carlos Sainz, Oliver Rowland and Pierre Gasly, all being stranded on the grid. It meant they started from the pit lane, so it has given Sergei Sorokin a golden opportunity to score his first victory in the category. He is out front ahead of Zol Amberg. In the moment, it's Pietro Fantini who completes the podium. The ISR team watching on in the garages as their man, their sole entry, Jessamine Jafar, chases down Roberto Merhi in the Zeta course car. And for Jafar, he has shown his experience. He's bounced back well from the first 2 rounds of the season, which didn't really go in his favour. That big crash in the first race at Monza, then a tough time at the Motorland Aragon for Jafar, just a 13th place and a 9th place to show from that. He then had 2 third places on the bounce, Monte Carlo and Spa, 6th in the second race at Spa, and he is therefore on course at the moment for his 5th points finish in a row. He's not quite close enough to Roberto Merhi at the moment. A little bit surprised that Will Stevens maybe hasn't been able to take advantage of this battling between Merhi and Jafar to close that gap down a little bit more than he has from 6th position.
Yeah, it's not making huge inroads at the moment, but obviously a good week for Will Stevens so far, because it's recently been announced that he's going to be driving Caterham's Formula 1 car at the post-British Grand Prix test at Silverstone the week after next, which is obviously an enormous opportunity for him. Stevens, the Caterham Racing Academy driver, has been backed by them for quite a while, and it'll be great to see him out at the wheel of that particular car. Obviously, there have been some rumours over the future of Caterham and exactly what's going to happen with that team. Tony Fernandez, I think, was making some remarks on Twitter yesterday that sounded certainly a bit doom and gloom, and there are even some rumours that there are buyers lined up waiting for the team. But I think whatever happens there, I think it's likely that they'll continue in some form, and Stevens will have something to show for it.
If Tony Fernandez does pull out, all I'd say is please put Joey Barton in the car for at least one race before he does pull out. For the reference there, by the way, Tony Fernandez also is the owner of the QPR football team as well. And it would be a shame, because he was so enthusiastic about going racing Formula 1, Fernandez, when he first came in to the sport, but the success maybe hasn't been as hoped. So the leading duo still nice and tight, as is the fight for 4th and 5th. Mehi from Jafar. Roberto Mehi, really the pace setter in the Zeta Course team this season. His teammate Roman Mavlanov, who has been a very, very busy bunny over the last couple of weeks, because he is combining his front of the road 3.5 litre antics with campaigning the International GT Open Championship, where he's right at the top of the championship standings there. And he is in the middle of a 5-week run of races, because he was in Jerez last weekend, see Moscow this weekend, then it's on to Budapest for him next weekend for the GT Open, then the Nürburgring the weekend after for the Formula Renault 3.5 litre cars, and then on to Silverstone in the GT Open. So it's a tough life being a top-level international racing driver. That's
a roster to really envy. He's yeah, certainly keeping himself very, very busy there. Wouldn't mind a piece of that. But Mehi for the, indeed. Mehi, for the time being, though, seems to have weathered this assault from Jafar, and that's quite surprising. I mean, Jafar was really throwing it at him a couple of laps ago. It makes you wonder if perhaps Mehi got offline, maybe got onto some of the dirty part of the track and lost a bit of time, and that was what allowed Jafar to get onto him. But he's got his head down and pulled that gap back out again. And it's a similar situation at the front, where Amberg is still around about a second or so behind Sergei Sorokin, but not able to do anything about the lead at the moment. It's been a good drive for Sorokin so far, but still some way to go for him. And Amberg rolling it into this long left-hander that opens the lap, and now into a sequence of sort of quicker bends where the drivers are often finding themselves having to steer and brake the car at the same time and really hook up the apices. And there's a lot of points in this series of corners where they don't take maybe the perfect line for an individual corner, but they think about how the car is going to be as it comes out of that corner to line them up into the next one to get the best line through it, and so on through a sequence of corners that really doesn't break up for quite a while until they get to this part of the lap here, which is turns 7, 8 and 9, which is a little bit quicker. I think you're comparing it to Motorland Aragon before. It's a little bit like also, I think, the Korea International Circuit, which again you would perhaps expect, because of course all three were designed by Herman Tilke, who has a virtual monopoly on racing circuit design these days. This is another one of his, and one of the few that haven't been used for Formula 1.
Yeah, it's not one of Herman the Hairpin's finest efforts, this, the Moscow Raceway, if I'm being brutally honest. In a country with space as abundant as Russia, you'd hope maybe for something a little bit more flowing. That said, what the circuit is absolutely brilliant for, and I think why it's so important for Russian motorsport, is that it's a track that really forces drivers to hone and perfect their technique. It's some particularly big slicks and wings cars, it makes it very difficult for the cars to run particularly close together for sustained periods. But for young Russian drivers looking to take their first steps in motorsport, this is a brilliant circuit on which to learn your craft.
Matthias Lein is beginning to make some inroads into Richie Stanaway in front of him in the Lotus. We're starting to see that gap close up a little bit, but as we've seen, it is tricky for these drivers, even with the advantage of the drag reduction system on their rear wings, to get in a position to make a move. And even when they do make a move, we've seen it can end in tears, as obviously happened with Carlos Sainz Jr. and Oliver Rowland. The stewards have said that they're going to investigate that one after the race. I hope that they've got some better footage of it than what we've seen, because based on that, it's a little bit hard to judge who was at fault there. I'm sure they'll have something, and they'll be able to get the footage off Carlos Sainz's onboard camera at least.
Yeah, and judging by the puce shade of Oliver Rowland's face, I think he's going to give them some character testimony as well, probably before the checkered flag. Anyway, there is Carlos Sainz. He continues. He is in 16th position. So after all of his adventures, he's actually pretty much where he should have started the race, in 16th, but he is running in splendid isolation and looking very unlikely to get into the points, but crucially for him, nor are any of the drivers surrounding him in the championship. And to put it in the context, it's a little bit like some of those stages you get in the middle of the Tour de France, where the yellow jersey's quite happy to let the breakaway ride off into the distance because none of them are a particular threat, and that is the case for Science today with Sergei Sirotkin. He's got, though, a group of cars running up ahead of him, but he is headed by Bajtskevisa in 12th. He'll be looking to get onto terms with Roman Mavlanov, Luka Giotto and Marco Sorensen, who complete that quartet. We go in car with Science teammate Norman Nato.
Who somewhere along the lines has maybe had some sort of problem because he's dropped behind Science, despite Science being massively delayed by the tangle with Roland. And Science is now, as you say, closing on Marco Sorensen.
And Pierre Gasly, who is a lap down, and he's also some way behind Nato on the road as well. Norman Nato from Antibes in his second season in the Formula Renault 3.5 litre championship. And it's been a perplexing year thus far, in that he had that absolutely blistering weekend on the streets of Monaco, arguably the toughest circuit of the season, but thereafter a brace of 5th places at Spa is about as good as it has got. So here are the race leaders, Sergei Sirotkin and Zoe Lamberg. They are on their 20th lap of the race. In 3rd place it is the Brazilian driver Pietro Fantini, and he is looking well set for his first career podium in the Formula Renault 3.5 litre championship. Comfortably his best result in the season as well, particularly after the early retirements, after disagreements with the tyre wall that he had at Spa. In 4th then it's Roberto Merhi, who has for the time being shaken off the attentions of Jessamine Jaffar. Now there's been a lot of debate, Keith, with Sergei Sirotkin and his very rapid elevation into that Sauber F1 test seat and potentially a Sauber Formula 1 race seat for 2015, and I think the debate is, clearly Sirotkin's got talent, we're seeing that today, but is it a case of too much too soon?
Well, I mean, this all began, of course, when Sauber said last year that they'd found some sponsorship or were, to use their terms, a partnership deal with various Russian organisations, and as part of that they were going to help Sirotkin towards a race seat, and certainly at one point they were considering putting him in the car for this season, which surely would have been massively premature, and I think even for 2015 it would be a big ask. I mean, as you say, he is only 18 years old. He has moved up to this level. This is his 2nd year in Formula Renault 3.5 at a very, very early stage, and yeah, so I would say yes. You know, it's you don't gain anything by rushing the drivers in when they're not ready. I mean, you do get drivers who are precocious and can take the immediate jump up to the more powerful cars, and Sirotkin has shown some excellent flashes of potential, not just in this series but also when he was in AutoGP before it, but certainly at this stage you would say he's not close enough to be in the finished article.
And that's really what the purpose of this Formula Renault 3.5 litre championship is all about, is actually to work through some of those teething problems, because you do have some exceptional talents. Lewis Hamilton would be an example, who've made it through the junior ranks of single-seaters very quickly into Formula 1. But actually, you see some of the difficulties he's had whilst he's been in Formula 1. The pressure's got to him, he's had difficult relationships with the media, with the team. And you sometimes think, well, actually, if he had just spent another year or two before coming up to F1, would he be having those issues now?
We're seeing quite a lot of locking up in the middle of the field now as more and more drivers jockeying position. We're looking at Mavlanov, the local driver who's obviously already been warned by the stewards, and Luca Giotto really piling on the pressure, the Italian driver in the Draco car. And this is the stage in the race where certainly the fronts have been locked up once too many, the rears have been spun up once too many, and they're starting to suffer with their tyres a bit.
And I think part of the issue here for Mavlanov as Giotto runs out very, very wide. He blinks first, and he's lost out to Sorensen. He's going to lose out to Sainz as well. So the Italian rookie, Luca Giotto, who finished 9th in last year's 2 litre Euro Cup, loses several places. I was about to say that I think for Mavlanov, fitness might start to become a little bit of an issue as we have a replay of William Buller running wide out over the AstroTurf. It's costing you no places. Here's the error from Giotto, and he clips the curb on the way into the corner. It just unsettles the car and pushes Giotto out wide. So the AVF team watch on, because with 8 minutes to go, their man, Zol Amberg, currently is in second place, chasing down Sergei Sorokin for the win. At the moment, Sorokin, the equal to everything that Amberg can throw at him. What's been quite impressive here, Keith, and I'll be very interested to see how the next 7.5 minutes unfold, is that although Amberg has kept Sorokin honest, at no point I don't think he's been close enough to Sorokin to get really into that turbulent air and start overexerting his Michelin tyres. No,
he's sort of been maintaining a watching brief, hasn't he? He's got within that sort of 1 second window, and he's not pushing any closer. And these final stage of the races are going to reveal to us now whether Amberg has sort of been keeping something back in hand, and whether he's been, looking after his tyres a little bit more or so on, and whether he's able to push it a little bit harder and really take the fight to Sorokin, or whether this is him at 10 tenths and we're not going to see him pulling any closer than we have done. And Sorokin certainly seems to be absorbing it all nicely so far. He's not had to get defensive or anything like that yet, but equally he will be aware that that car is there bobbing around in his rearview mirrors, not least because it's painted in the least subtle shade of lurid, eye-gouging orange. Yeah, you could see that one from space, couldn't you? It is reminiscent of the sort of tracksuit that you'd see when I was growing up in Bristol, in the town centre on a Saturday afternoon. Or in your wardrobe.
Exactly. As Bajtskivisa in the sister car, under pressure from Avlanov and Sorensen. Carlos Sainz chasing in, and Lucas Giotto. That clearly is a car that maybe has got tyres on that are past their best. So Mavlanov chases down Visser, then it's Marco Sorensen, and there is Roman Mavlanov, who has been very impressive in the International GT Open, coming off the back of a couple of difficult seasons in the 2 litre Euro Cup, where he was much beloved of the spare parts department, but not by his mechanics, and he has adapted reasonably well to these 3.5 litre cars this year. So we've got 6 minutes plus a lap to go. Still, Amberg applying the pressure to Sergei Sorokin, trying to force the error from Sorokin, but this has been very impressive from the pair of them. They have lapped in synchronicity for the best part of the last 20 laps. We're on lap 24 of the race, and still Amberg hasn't been able to force that error from Sorokin, hasn't been able to force that opportunity that he really needs to pounce and challenge for the victory. But he has just taken a solid 2 tenths of a second out of Sorokin the last time by, and as they crossed the finishing line, the gap was less than 6 tenths of a second. Now, as we've seen, and has been the pattern so far in this race, Sorokin is just edging a little bit further ahead in these twistier sections of the lap. It's around the final bit that Amberg is really getting closer, but the gap certainly coming down between the two of them in very different lines as they come around turn 12 there. Sorokin holding his Fortec car quite a bit tighter on the exit of the corner. Amberg letting his run out rather wider, and now they come onto this long back straight, which brings them towards the final corner on the track, the big left-hander. Amberg's taken another 10th out of Sorokin in the second sector of this lap, and with just under 5 minutes plus a lap left, we're now seeing what Amberg's got, and he's very close as they come around to begin the next lap. He really is. The question for me, though, is he spent a lot of that last lap very close to the rear wing of Sergei Sorokin. Now, you can do that maybe for a lap or so, maybe for a couple of corners, but after a while, you start to get some graining on those Michelin tyres, because they're working harder than ever, because they have to counteract the turbulent air given off from the car in front. And that is, you can see what Amberg is struggling with in the opening turns of this lap. They're probably going to have another 3 or 4 laps here. And now Amberg has to start thinking tactically, because there are 2 main overtaking opportunities, which is turns 15 and turn 1. And I say them in that order because you use the run down the back straight into 15 to maybe set up the move for turn 1. And that's what Amberg needs to start doing, is backing off from Sorokin in the first sector of the lap and then closing up onto the tail of the Russian driver through this sequence of corners, so he gets a good run out of 14 onto that kilometre-long back straight. Well, whether intentionally or not, probably not. He did drop back a little back from Sorokin in the first sector in this lap, because he locked his inside right wheel and ran just a little bit wide, didn't make the apex, and the unforgiving timing monitors show him 3 tenths down, but he's made some of that back up later on in the second sector of the lap, but the net loss is pretty clear to see. He's not as closely tucked up under the wing of the Fortec car as they come round, and Sorokin so far soaking up what Amberg can throw at him as he gets ever closer towards the end of this race. It's been
been a good drive from Sorokin so far, and maybe this is maybe that was the best we had from Amberg. Maybe that's going to be his best opportunity to wrest the lead from Sorokin.
Well, Zol Lamberg, he's running out of time here. He's probably going to have 3 more laps at the conclusion of this one. By my admittedly somewhat shaky maths, as Vitskevisser under pressure from Mavlanov. This a replay. Mavlanov jinking to the inside and making the move stick. Mavlanov gains the place. That is for 12th place.
And Sorensen was also very well placed to attack Visser as they came out of the corner. Visser appears to have held on to her 13th place now, having dropped behind Mavlanov, but clearly the other ABF car not going quite as well as Amberg's is up at the front, because Visser clearly under quite a bit of pressure now from the Tech 1 driver Sorensen. The gap between the leading pair is pretty much as it was. It's gone up by a 10th. It's still under a second, and Amberg's still trying to do what he can to throw a move on Sorokin. I reckon we're going to get 3 laps left in this race now, with Sorokin trying to bring his car home to a victory, which would be his first in Formula 1 3.5 in front of his home crowd, and that would be absolutely fantastic for this Russian driver with big dreams of following the likes of Vitaly Petrov and Daniel Kvyat up into Formula 1.
It's always a very proud moment when you win in front of your home crowd, and that's what Sergei Sorokin is looking to do. And Zol Lamberg, all that pressure, at no stage in the race has really been poised to make the manoeuvre. Meanwhile, Marco Sorensen is still snapping on the heels of Vitskevisser. Has he got enough DRS to close up under the slipstream down the back straight? Well, Visser also uses some DRS, and therefore the gap remains much as it was. I am surprised that Carlos Sainz, given what he has shown thus far this season, hasn't made more progress in the course of today's race.
Well, no, he's really not done anything at all, and we saw this even before he had that tangle with Roland. He wasn't making any kind of attempt really to get past Norman Nato, and that was partly why he ended up under attack from Roland. So it's been a pretty disappointing showing from him, really. I mean, obviously he had the problem at the start, which meant he had to start in the pit, and as Sorensen runs wide and hands 14th place on a platter to Carlos Sainz Jr., just as he was looking well placed to put an attacking move on Vitskevisser. And this is what we say, it's in this middle part of the lap you can only really lose places, and we've seen drivers lock up and run wide, and Giotto did it, and now Sorensen's done it as well.
Yep, so a mistake there from Marco Sorensen. Consistency lets him down. It is semi-helpful for Carlos Sainz, and he goes 14th. It's not going to bring him any closer to the points, and even if he's able to overhaul Vitskevisser between now and the checkered flag, there's not an awful lot more that he can do from there. So Sainz chasing Visser in 14th, but today he's going to have to chalk off as one of those days. Don't forget though that they do have a complete qualifying session for tomorrow's race. Tomorrow's race will also have the mid-race pit stops, where the strategy component comes to the fore, and certainly given the way that today's race is unfolded, I suspect that it's going to be a race where strategy is key as teams look to feed their drivers in and out of clear air. So we're on the penultimate lap. Sergei Sorokin leading the way from Zol Lamberg. Pietro Fantin maintains third.
Well, there must be something about the Moscow Raceway, because if you joined us for the 2-litre race this morning, you'd have seen the top 3 drivers in the championship just score a total of 1 point between them. As things stand in the 3.5-litre race, the top 3 drivers in the championship are going to score no points between them.
Yes, and it means that everything's going to bunch up in the mid-pack in terms of the championship standings. So we go on to the last lap, and the weekend is almost half done, because we will be back tomorrow morning at 9:45 with all of the live coverage from the 2-litre and 3.5-litre races. They will be up long before we are, because they have got their qualifying sessions very early in the morning, which in UK time means they'll be able to qualify something like 6, 7 in the morning in preparation for these races tomorrow afternoon. So don't forget to join us for the action live tomorrow from the Moscow Raceway. Will Sergei Sorokin make it a double victory? Will Zol Lamberg be able to go one better, or will those at the top of the championship who've had the misfortune today be able to bounce back and get themselves up into the points? But despite the misfortune for Gasly, Rowland and Sainz today, let's not take anything away from Sergei Sorokin, because he put the car on pole position, he eased away at the start of the race, and thereafter he's controlled things perfectly.
And just as importantly, he didn't stall his car when we had the problem at the start of the race for Gasly and Rowland and Sainz that put them back in the pack. And you have to have the attention to detail in motor racing. It's every last little bit that can add up to a race win, and maybe that's just what Sergei Sorokin is about to discover. So
to steal liberally from Rick Mayall's Blackadder character, Sorokin is fast by name, almost very fast by nature. He comes through and takes the victory for the Vortec team here in front of his home crowd at the Moscow Raceway. Sorokin wins it, Zoe Lamberg taking a career-best second-place finish, and Pietro Fantine on to the podium for the first time in his 3.5-litre career. Sorokin, though, he has withstood race-long pressure, as Mehi took fourth, Jafar fifth, and Will Stevens the first from home in sixth. Really classy drive by Sergei Sorokin, soaked up that pressure, particularly towards the end from Zoe Lamberg. Zoe Lamberg was really applying the pressure with about 5 minutes to go. He closed to within a few tenths of a second of Sorokin, but he didn't make a mistake. He didn't allow Amberg to get into a position where he could throw the AVF car up the inside, and what a classy way to score your first win in front of your home crowd. This is the sort of performance that the Sauber Formula One team, when evaluating when to put Sergei Sorokin in the race seat, will say, well, actually, he's got it. He's got the pace, and he's got the emerging maturity. In isolation, it's an impressive drive. The fact that he's had to have a month to reflect on 2 non-finishes at Spa makes it even better. It shows that he has got the psychology working perfectly for him, and you talk to the driver coaches, they say that getting the right mindset is so important at this level, and Sorokin has maintained the confidence, has delivered a very assured performance, and he has scored the victory. We'll now enjoy the applause of the crowd and the marshals as he heads around to Parc Fermé and to celebrate on the top step of the Moscow Raceway rostrum. So though it was a disappointing day for Vortec's British driver Oliver Rowland, the Russian driver Sorokin wins it, and Vortec continue their impressive run at the Moscow Raceway. So a look then at the results. Victory for Sergei Sorokin, 8/10 second in the end, clear of Zoe Lamberg in second, Pietro Fantine in third from Roberto Mehi, who pulled some way clear of Jasmine Jafar. Will Stevens an excellent sixth. William Buller once more just outside the points in 11th, ahead of Roman Blanov. Bajtskevisa, a very muted Carlos Sainz in 14th. Pierre Gasly a lap down in 18th, and Oliver Rowland alongside Maarten van Buren failing to make it through to the checkered flag. So it was a race of intrigue and plenty of talking points. Sets us up beautifully for tomorrow. Don't forget, 9:45 tomorrow morning. We'll have full live coverage of the 2-litre and 3.5-litre racing. Sorokin comes to a halt in Parc Fermé. Well, after being let down by Aurélien Panis earlier on for the nose stand, I'm hoping that Sorokin will redeem this growing tradition.
Climbs out of the car. We should see a very, very happy podium here, because all 3 drivers have just taken their best ever results, and there's a very, very happy Sorokin, who is doing his best to spoil Ben Evans' day by not doing the obligatory jump onto the nose cone of his Vortec car.
I just admire it, because I'm not an athlete and I'd probably break the car if I tried to do the same thing. So Sorokin goes to celebrate with the Vortec team, and they will be overjoyed with that. They have had the fastest car at the Moscow race, but they've got the setup absolutely to perfection. As you say, all 3 drivers really capitalising on a day where maybe the established order was a little bit turned on its head. They kept a cool head, they put in the performance that they needed to do. You can hear the cheers from the arriving Vortec team, the fans as well, packing out the grandstand opposite the pit area. And we will hope to hear from Sergei Sorokin in a few moments' time. He's got to avail himself of his helmet, hands, device and balaclava. Before he does that, he is being ushered in the direction as well of the scales, as we take a look then at Sorokin taking the checkered flag. You can see that Zoe Lamberg kept him very honest all the way through to the end of the race. So So the podium is readied for our top 3 finishers. Before they get to the podium, we should hear very shortly from, I'm sure, absolutely delighted Sergei Sorokin, who has really answered a lot of the comments from the critics over the course of the past 45 minutes or so. So the Russian fans have been treated to an excellent day's entertainment. Stunt displays, classic car displays, Formula 1 displays, going to make their way home. Hopefully they will all be back for tomorrow's action. The Moscow Raceway, an increasingly common stop now on the international motorsport calendar. The DTM cars through Euro Series heading there a little bit later on in the summer. As the Zeta course car of Roman Mavlanov is wheeled down the pit lane. We'll hear from our race winner.
Finally, you get it.
Yeah, finally, you're right. Actually, it started well after qualifying, as I actually told you. But that was not the end. It was quite a difficult race for me. It gets much warmer actually from the quali, so we need to measure to make sure that the tires stay there for the whole race, which was not that easy, I would say. But anyway, I mean, the car worked well. I just tried to focus to do not over push in the beginning to save the tires to the end, and I was.
Sergei Sorokin hasn't decided to become a performance artist on the South Bank. That is the picture freezing on us, and so the interview somewhat abruptly terminated before Pietro Fantin and Zol Lamberg get welcomed onto the rostrum. The champagne is waiting, dignitaries are waiting as well. In terms of the rookie prize, by the way, if you're following that, today's rookie winner was Roberto Merhi with that 4th place. As we take a look back at the highlights of the race, which didn't get going first time round due to an issue for Pierre Gasly, who stalled, but as they departed on their formation lap, Oliver Rowland also lost his engine, and Carlos Sainz encountered trouble as well at the back of the field. Sainz, though, was the first to be pushed from the grid, so he was at the head of the queue on the pit lane. When the race did get started, poleman Sergei Sorokin converted into a lead he wouldn't relinquish ahead of Zol Lamberg and Pietro Fantin. It's behind, they all cleanly made it through the first turn, except for Mavlanov, who ran wide and gained 2 places in consequence. Well, the battle in the early stage was between 2 of the drivers at the top of the standings, Carlos Sainz and Oliver Rowland. Unfortunately, that ended with Rowland and Sainz tangling into the final turn. Rowland retired, Sainz continued, but was muted in pace thereafter. Well, out front, Zol Lamberg kept Sergei Sorokin honest throughout proceedings, as Jasmine Jafar and Roberto Merhi also had a good scrap. It was decided in favour of Merhi. It was a super fight for 12th place, which Lucas Giotto was eliminated from after that small error. Mavlanov eventually claiming the position after a daring move to the inside of Bichkevisa into turn 1. Vissa then came under pressure from Marco Sorensen before he slid wide with a couple of laps to go, and that promoted Carlos Sainz. Out front, though, although pressurised, Sorokin was never really troubled, and he was able to lead from lights to flag to take a very fine debut victory in the Formula Renault 3.5 litre championship, chased all the way home by Zol Lamberg, with Pietro Fantin completing the podium. So a home win for Sorokin. A delight for the Fortec Motorsport squad. Championship standings then, and Carlos Sainz still leads the way from Pierre Gasly. Will Stevens, though, climbs up to 3rd. He was the only one of the front runners to be in the points today. Jafar in 5th, ahead of the emerging Sorokin. Still got almost all of the field have scored points thus far this season. Underlines just how competitive the championship is. In the Teams Championship, Dams have been closed in a little bit by Fortec, and Straka Arden slipped to 4th, ahead of ISR. So on to the podium comes Pietro Fantin, Zol Lamberg runner-up. Sergei Sorokin takes the win here in the Moscow Raceway. So that's it for today. We will be back tomorrow morning at 9:45 for all the action from race 2. But next, do stay tuned to look at all the action from the World Rally Championship. From Keith Collentine and myself, Ben Evans, it's goodbye from Moscow.